I'm delighted to be talking today with Joan Clifford and Deborah Reisinger about their book, Community-Based Language Learning, a Framework for Educators, which GU Press published in 2018. Joan is Assistant Professor of the Practice in Romance Studies at Duke University, while Deborah is Associate Professor of the Practice in the same department at Duke. So thank you both for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I wonder if we could begin by, if you could just tell us what you mean by community-based language learning and how it can be used in language courses.
Yeah, that's a great question and an important one to start with for sure. So community-based learning is a critical approach to service learning that places students in contact with newcomer communities and the organizations that serve them. So that might be law offices for immigration services, refugee resettlement centers, or local schools, for example. But instead of focusing on charity-based work, like creating a website or raising money for a cause, community-based learning is really about relationship building and seeing the community as an asset. So the idea is that we have something to learn from each other. And so for our language students, it's a really great opportunity to learn more about culture and to learn about language and to practice in context with other native speakers. So all of our CBL courses have an academic component. So that takes place in the classroom itself. And then there's a community-based component where they're doing this sort of community-based work, working with the newcomer communities. And then there's an element of reflection as well. And that's typical of most service learning paradigms.
Thank you. That's really helpful to get us started. Joan, would you like to add anything to that definition?
No, I think Deb has covered it really well. I do think that it's important to really consider the breadth of the range of world languages that can get involved with community-based language practices, and specific to the language groups of maybe Chinese communities or Arabic communities, the type of interaction that you can build with the community is going to be different. And I'm sure we'll give some examples as we go through the conversation today. Thank
you. So could you outline some of the benefits of bringing CBL into the language classroom?
Sure. We spend an entire chapter in our book developing the student learning outcomes. So we do want to reference that, encourage you to look at that in more detail. But just as an overview, what we find with the world language students is that when they get involved with community-based learning, that they really can build on the high impact practices that we see with all the community engaged practices that are possible. We see that they build the professional skills, they build the awareness of social and political issues. There's increased motivation for learning languages. There's building of confidence in the language. There's also a greater empathy. There's an awareness of diversity. Within certain groups like heritage language learners, experts have also identified that there's greater self-esteem and there's perhaps even building of cultural identity for that particular group. For first generation students, we also see that there is greater retention and greater perseverance in taking language courses. On the language proficiency level, we do see gains in vocabulary development, as well as the basic confidence building that I mentioned before in using the language with native speakers. So there's a wide range of impacts. We know that service learning literature has identified many different impacts of community-based practices. And what we find is that when the language student is involved with community engagement, then there are even additional outcomes that we need to be aware of.
Thank you. So that's great. So you're seeing both qualitative and quantitative impacts on the students. Deb, do you want to add anything to what Joan has said on this topic?
I think she's done a really nice job of kind of summarizing the research that's out there. And just anecdotally, I would say that students are really enthusiastic about these courses. They tend to fill up very quickly. And they seem really, they say in our end of semester evaluations generally that they felt that they really got to know the community in a different way, and that it was really exciting to be able to use their language in an actual context outside of the classroom. And so we find that they're really great ways to retain students in our programs and to generate enthusiasm about them as well. I will also say that for the communities themselves, we've had great feedback. We've worked really closely with the French-speaking communities in Durham, and they continually ask for our students. And when we have gap semesters, I hear from these folks a lot, like, why aren't you sending me a student this semester? I love working with these people. And even when it's in a little bit in English, a little bit in French, that language gives a bridge that's really, really powerful. I can't say enough what it is to just start off with a simple bonjour, comment allez-vous, and then switching into English. It adds an element of connection that we really, is hard to establish otherwise.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's an important point, that the community benefits as well as the students. So do you use this technique both in general language courses as well as when you're teaching languages for specific purposes like Spanish for healthcare or that kind of thing? Could you just tell us a little bit more, I guess, about the context in which you use CBL?
There are a range of courses that we see it successfully integrated into. It could be a course like our health, culture, and the Latinx community advanced Spanish course. We offer that regularly. We even offer one section as a traditional language course and one section as a community-based learning course. And so it's always interesting to see kind of the different types of experiences that those students have based on if they're involved with the service component or not. But we have also intermediate level language courses that are involved. We have other advanced type seminar courses. We even have a cultures and languages across the curriculum tutorials, which are half-credit courses that also have community-based components to them. So there's a huge range of possibilities. It doesn't have to be only language for a specific purpose type of curriculum. It can be also integrated into a regular or traditional curriculum.
Thank you. Deb, do you want to add anything to that answer?
I think she covered it pretty nicely. Yeah, that's pretty much what we do.
Okay,
basically, it can be anywhere and everywhere. Yeah.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you. So obviously we're talking and we're doing this by Zoom because we're in the middle of the pandemic. And so I was wondering if you've been able to use CBL during this time of distance learning, and if you could talk us through a little bit how you've done that.
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that we have been grappling with since early March. I am teaching a course this semester on global displacement in French. And in a typical semester, we would place students in direct contact with recently resettled refugee families. So students would go to their homes every week in direct contact, right, and serve as kind of friendship partners. And with COVID, this, is not possible. And to boot, both our universities and our public schools are completely online. So we really had to rethink how we were going to do this. And so this summer, I reached out to two refugee resettlement agencies in our area. And together, we brainstormed what the community needs were right now and how students might be able to help. And so this semester, half of my class is working with World Relief, a resettlement organization, and they're offering after-school tutoring on Zoom to middle and high school students. And they're doing that in a very like controlled environment, if you will. So everybody comes together at once, and then they go into breakout rooms with another adult and a couple children, because we have to abide by the minors policies, of course. And then the other half of my students are working with a different organization on a variety of projects. And those have included voter education. So they've done phone banking with refugees who've recently received their citizenship and so can vote. And others have developed teaching materials that could be used in citizenship classes and for technology, because we've found that a lot of kids are really struggling with, being online. If you're not a native speaker of English and you've just received this, new computer and you're supposed to be doing your courses online, it's really challenging. I have kids right now trying to do that at home who are native speakers of English, and they're super challenged. And the inequities are great. And so that's what we've decided to work on this semester. So I've been actually really impressed with how responsive the organizations have been, and also how much my students have gotten out of this, despite the fact that it's online. It hasn't really turned out to be much of a problem. It's just different.
That's great. That's wonderful to hear that you've been able to, help newly settled students, and that your students are still able to, take advantage of this pedagogical technique. Joan, what's been your experience during the pandemic?
Right. So my students in the health course have worked both with translating documents for a local food bank, as well as translating documents for the Duke Cancer Institute. And they have also been tutoring with a student organization that's been working at with the partnership between Duke students and community students for the last 15, 20 years, usually targeting the Latinx community. So that it's teaching English to adults in the community. So we've been able to maintain work. It's definitely transitioned. I think that we have to keep in mind the levels of challenges that technology brings to community work, just as Deb was referencing, just trying to learn to navigate the technology in order to be enrolled and actively participate in the coursework in the public schools is a big challenge. What we have seen as a result of COVID is that there is a very active push to try to provide language equity and additional support services for multilingual speakers in our community, specifically because people are very conscious now of the inequities in our systems. And that ties in directly to much of the conversation that Deb and I tried to build in our book about the fact that we don't undertake the community-based practices lightly, that we really feel that one of the major goals for our university students is to really consciously deconstruct those barriers and look at where the structural inequities lie in our society and use their language abilities to really work for social change. So we think that this is kind of a moment in time that's very difficult, and yet it is a time that provides us with many opportunities. We have to be very aware and that the community partner organizations are very overwhelmed at this time. So if you're interested in establishing a partnership, it is important to really be very careful with how you approach the partners, and also be very careful in how you try to negotiate a partnership to move forward. So I don't know if Deb, you want to pick up on that thread a little bit?
I would just really underline the importance of that piece of it, really helping our students to see that they need to listen to the community needs. There's a real penchant to want to fix things quickly when we realize that there are problems, and our students are really smart and they see solutions very easily, but sometimes they don't understand the complexities of structures that are in place and have been pretty much cemented for a long time. And so encouraging them to work within programs that have been doing the longstanding work within the communities is really important. And so there is a certain amount of redirecting that we need to do when we place students in contact with communities. And a lot of that happens, throughout the course of the semester. They will hit moments in the semester where it feels like, oh, I thought I was going to change this person's life. What happened? And I'm like, well, who told you you were going to do that? So there's a lot of internal expectations that students tend to have just because they're learning and they want to have an impact. And that's a very natural thing. But we have to, we use a lot of reflection in class to kind of head off that tendency, because it is dangerous. It is an assumption, and it can lead to kind of underlining the privilege and power that these students already have in many ways.
Thank you. So, we talked about some of the challenges of working remotely and in this online environment at the moment. But I think one of the things we've discovered as publishers during this last 9 months is that there are technological advances that have been beneficial, I think, to the dissemination of scholarship. So, for example, we can have a webinar like this with you all, and you don't need to come to Georgetown to do it, and the participants don't need to either. So I was wondering if there are opportunities that have been created by the last 9 months and things that you might see yourself incorporating into your teaching on an ongoing basis. Deb, do you want to go first?
I have been pleasantly surprised, as I mentioned earlier, by how well things have gone this semester. And not to say that it was perfect, but I found that working online, because the students were having to do it themselves already as students, and they understood a little bit better what people were going through. And I think that really made a difference. It kind of equalized things a little bit. Because of the nature of the semester too, they seem to have a different allegiance to the organizations with whom they're working. We had to work a lot more closely and through the organizations. In a typical semester, we might just ask the students to visit families regularly. And so there was a lot more interface than usual. And that was a good thing. I think that was really helpful for them to understand all of the inequities that are out there. I think they really saw the challenges that the organizations were facing in different ways. I've also noticed that a lot more students are interested in continuing to do this work in the spring. Our semester has already ended, but the public schools have not. And my students are voluntarily coming back because it's a lot easier to just turn on your computer for an hour on Tuesdays and Thursdays than to actually displace yourself and go to a school and so on. So it's, in terms of time, it's a little bit easier than another way. So I think we might even continue to do this next year, depending on what the organizations do.
Great, thank you. Joan, do you want to add a little bit from your experience?
I think that I completely agree with what Deb was saying, in that the students, I think, are interacting with the community in slightly different ways. There's a different nuance to it in the current situation, and I also have students who are seeking out ways that they can continue to work for the organizations during the break, and have already committed to continuing with the tutoring with the community in the spring semester. So I just thinking about other examples from other courses that use the community-based learning. We know that people worked with phone banks for voting. We know that they created teaching materials for public school teachers. And I know that even one Spanish colleague created a website that houses all kinds of support materials to teach Spanish. So videos and games. That also was the the format that our Chinese colleagues used with the local IB school that also teaches Mandarin. They supported the teacher specifically with creating materials to help that teacher with lesson plans. So I think that there are different opportunities available now that are very sustainable. But honestly, there are also other opportunities that are lost. I know that one of the most formative community-based experiences that I've seen my students go through in the past couple of years has been door-to-door survey work that they did for the public health department. The students had so many observations and so many realizations of the local communities and how they themselves were in or not in full understanding of what was going on in those communities. That was possible because they physically went into different neighborhoods and they interacted with the different neighbors in those communities. So hopefully we will get back to that. But there are other opportunities, like for the spring semester, my students are going to be working with a group called Root Causes. That is an initiative by Duke Medical students to support patients who might be having problems with access to food during the pandemic. And so my students are going to be able to do phone calls to follow up with those clients, to track the food deliveries, to track their levels of satisfaction, and to just monitor how those people are doing once they have left the hospital for their treatment at the hospital. So there are ways that the students can have kind of a deeper connection with community members, but it is different, and we'll just continue to try to listen to the community and to listen to our community partners and to find ways that our students are going to be able to really work to their benefit.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really heartening to hear so much great work going on in difficult circumstances. So I was wondering if you could give some advice to perhaps a teacher who has not used community-based learning before and would like to incorporate it into her classroom. Where should she start? What would be your advice?
I think starting with the community is number one. And I think we've kind of hammered that idea out throughout this conversation, but it is, it cannot be underestimated. We really want to understand not only what the real needs are, but the bandwidth of our partners. Do they have time to be co-educators of our students? Because it is a role that we want them to play in this process. I would also suggest that teachers volunteer themselves. It's really helpful to have that experience within the community, to know the community, and not just put your students in some other place. It's useful to investigate support on your own campus too. There are often offices of service learning or community-based learning that are really fantastic and have a wealth of resources that are often untapped. And through those organizations, and Joan works for our service learning program at Duke, and I have met a phenomenal number of colleagues, in different departments doing really, really great work. And so that's helpful too, to support the teachers as they're doing this work. It is not an add-on. You can't just, add it onto your course. There needs to be time in the syllabus and in the semester to really allow space to support the kinds of reflection that is needed to do this work ethically and to do it well. And that is particularly true in the case of language courses. There's a lot more that has to happen there around helping them understand the different kinds of language that they will hear in the community that is sometimes not exactly what they're used to hearing in the classroom. And students need time to process that too.
Thank you. Joan, would you like to add anything?
I think that even if your particular institution doesn't have much direct support, like a civic engagement center, for example, it is very possible to network nationally. And I would encourage you to even consider the special interest group in Actville. That is for the critical and social justice approaches. There are a lot of different journals as well, very high-powered sharing of intellectual work. My personal favorite is the Michigan Journal for Community Service Learning. IR Slice, the International Association of Research Service Learning, is also really top-notch in terms of providing working groups as well as opportunities to network with colleagues. So obviously it's great if your institution has funding available. I know very much so at Duke, we appreciate the fact that we can hire an assistant to help us with the logistical part of having community partners. But if your institution doesn't provide that, then at least I would suggest trying to get the theoretical based work and even looking for lesson plans on the Campus Compact national website. Those are very helpful. There are also rubrics that are available through the AAC&U on community engagement. So there's a wealth of information out there, and what we tried to do in the book was to really try to synthesize together all of those resources into one place. So we also encourage you to use our book as a guide, because it can be a little overwhelming to maneuver through all the different aspects of community-based learning.
Thank you, and I want to second that in terms of utilizing the book. So we have time maybe for one more question, and I wanted to pose this to you, Deb. It's from a participant that she says, "I'd like to hear more about the course materials that some of your students have created for a citizenship class. Thank you."
I should say that I have not worked closely with that group that's created the citizenship materials. That is absolutely under the guidelines of the organization. They organize the courses, and the students have helped support them by doing those materials. Yeah, so I should probably stop there.
Well, I maybe ask a more general form of the question to end with. So could you talk about, each of you maybe talk briefly about one of your favorite CBL projects that you've done, and just something that inspired you and the students who worked on it?
I'll just keep going here then. We have been doing a fantastic project for the last couple of years that started with community needs. Our students were going to these families and needed some support because they aren't teachers, right? And they were identifying over time what the community needs were. And it was support with parent-teacher conferences, support with writing an email, support with understanding the bus system, and so on, some just daily needs. And so over time, we decided to have the students film videos of how to do those in English. And we had them subtitled and recorded in French and also in Swahili. And so we've created this website, which is dukehello.com. And anyone can go there, a volunteer or an individual, to learn more about what is life like in America and what are some of the basic steps to understanding how to break through some of the cultural barriers. So it's been really great, and it's a multi-year project. So we've been adding to it over time. So yeah.
Fantastic. Joan, would you like to have the last word?
The most impactful relationship that I have seen has been with the local public health department. Unfortunately, that's needed to be put on pause because they're obviously working very hard in other ways at the moment. So they don't have the bandwidth to work with us at the moment. But we've had, at least it's over a 3-year relationship with them. They conduct a community health assessment every 3 years in our community. And so we've worked with them in every single part of the cycle of preparing for the launch of the community health assessment, to actually going door to door, which I mentioned. And we've even worked with them to have focus groups with the Spanish-speaking community to check on results from the surveys. And we've also arranged information sessions to disseminate the results of the survey. So I think it's really beneficial for the students to see the entire life cycle of a project of that sort. And I've had both community members, people from the public health department, as well as previous students who have worked on this project at various stages, come and talk to the current class that was involved, which I think really sends the message that we want, that we're very invested in creating sustainable relationships that really are to the benefit of the community. So that's one of my favorites.
Thank you. That's really inspiring, and I think a great note to end on. So I want to thank you both for this conversation and for being with us today. This has been really wonderful, so thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks.
So I want to wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving holiday, and to say stay safe and sound, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time on Books for a Better World. So thanks everyone for being here today, and thank you both again.
Thank you.